also from Kaufman's level. I don't think we're there.
That's a great point. We do have a long way to go. Thank you. Okay. Thanks again, guys, for looking good up here and answering a question. But these are the individuals who you'll hear me refer to later. I'm sure we'll have plenty of communications on Group Hub and elsewhere about the website. I do welcome all that conversation to happen. And so you'll hear me mention, Joseph and David and Saeed repeatedly. So I just wanted to, at least you could put a face with a name. So thanks. All right, so since Jonathan isn't here, I'll take his role and introduce or bring up to the stage a couple of guys that you, I believe, saw yesterday and you know quite well. Mark Nagar from Startup Weekend, Nick Seguin from the Kaufman Foundation, and also Mark's colleague, Joey Pomeranke, who is Chief Marketing Officer. Is that right, Joey? Okay. At Startup Weekend as well. So they're going to talk to you a little bit about engaging startup communities in your campaigns, and hopefully you'll enjoy the conversation. So thanks, guys.
All right.
Good.
Is this one on? There we go. If you guys wouldn't mind, throw up the slide. Who here's ready for lunch? Woo! All right. So we're just going to take a little bit of time. I think each of us have very different points to hit on, but they're all going to kind of flow together here. One of the biggest things that we've had to deal with at Startup Weekend is making sure that we maintain contextual relevance when we're working with organizers around the world. And one of the hardest things to remember, just to the point made earlier, is you guys all have really strong brands in your respective communities, but our role is really, we're organizers of organizers. We're the networking hubs, right? We're the connectors, helping people understand where they fit in and what role they can play in a bigger ecosystem that we all operate in. I talked to you a little bit yesterday. This slide, sorry, is not the easiest to see. It was a little bit last minute, but I thought it would be helpful to articulate the model that we use when we're having discussions with people in various communities about how they fit in and what their efforts mean to the bigger picture. But this is a model that we've developed from the perspective of an entrepreneur. So a lot of models you hear about, where did startups come from and the phases of startups. It starts at, idea, then it goes to funding, then it goes to scale. And generally it's more from the perspective of an institution or from an investor. We took the perspective of an actual entrepreneur. So now this is probably not surprising to anybody, and this model may not be perfect, but it's extremely useful in the conversations that we all have with our partners. So the idea is that from the perspective of an entrepreneur, we can actually go through the different phases that they go through, and we can then actually map out the activities and the programs that exist in all of our communities and put them in contextual relevance, because one of the hardest things is making sure that everybody knows exactly how they fit in, because if you know your place in the ecosystem, you all of a sudden not only know who your partners are, things like measuring success become a lot more relevant because you can put it in context of not just quantitative success of the number of events, number of attendees, things like that, but you can start to measure the transition, the movement from one step to another. What kind of impact are we actually having on these people's lives, promoting entrepreneurship? So if everybody can see here, it all starts with inspiring. At one point, an entrepreneur gets inspired in their life, whether that's a TED Talk, mom, dad, somebody in their life got them to consider entrepreneurship as an option, got them excited about maybe one day doing their own thing. Then there's this discovery phase where you have to figure out, all right, am I crazy? Or are there other people like me? Kind of need to find your tribe, right? You need to know that you're not alone in the world. And so that's the real discovery phase. You start going to these other events. During GEW, we have a lot of them that really target this. You start listening to TED Talks, and you start going to user groups. Maybe you sign up for a course at your university, something like that. But then there's that phase when you actually decide, all right, I'm going to do something about this. I've got some ideas. I need to actually go out there and do something. Right? So that's when you start finding teams. You start going through those ideas, figuring out, do I have a good idea? And after that comes the startup phase. that's generally where the discussion begins in most of the other models out there. Now, the startup phase is great because we have a team of people with an idea. Now, we don't know if we have a good team. We don't know if we have a great idea. But that's the experimental phase, right? A team with an idea in search of a business model. Once they find a business model, it's ready to scale. So what are some of the typical players at each of these levels? I want all of you to think about the partners that you work with. And I can encourage you, I can give you a much simpler version that you guys can use later. But you can help in conversation with everybody to understand where they fit into a model like this. So, inspire, celebrate. I actually put TED in the TED Talks as a great, so a lot of us have TEDx. We have Ignite in our communities. That tends to be something like Ignite and more the discovery phase. Startup Weekend, we're more in the action phase, actually taking a step forward, not just talking about starting a company, figuring out how do I actually do this. The startup phase, we have a lot of accelerators, incubators in a lot of our communities, right? That tends to be at that phase. Scale, we have angel investors, we have VC groups that are playing in that early stage now. When we actually have a team and an idea, then high growth, ultimately that's where we're trying to send a lot of these companies, right? So anyways, as Startup Weekend, one of the biggest challenges we have, I talked a little bit yesterday, metrics, the quantitative part of that. But we've been able to actually map out where a lot of the different partners that we have sit within these ecosystems. And then by sharing data and working together, we can then track, all right, from an event like Ignite or TEDx, how many of those people are coming to Startup Weekend? From a Startup Weekend, how many of those people are then going on to something else, maybe applying and getting into an accelerator, some of these programs. And we've been able to use those metrics to actually track the impact that we're having on these people's lives and knowing that they're moving forward. And then also being able to come back to the entrepreneurs, because we have a role in our communities as that focal point, the network, for not just the partners, but the entrepreneurs. And when somebody comes to you, we need to be able to tell them and understand where they fit in the ecosystem, where they're going to get the most value. So if you have somebody that says, I've got an idea, it's a clean tech idea, and I know that you should go talk to Rex or Kevin with Clean Tech Open, because they're going to fit in the startup and maybe have some real great connections for them to get in the scale phase. So understanding where you can actually send people is very important too. I think that's been one of the most powerful things for us. Joey, you had a couple comments to make towards that as well.
Yeah, so when I think of startup communities, I try to put myself into the shoes of a new entrepreneur. And if I was to move to, say, Pristina, Kosovo, like who would I talk to in that community when I move there? And there should be that one person that I kind of call the connector, like the person that I know I could go to and is going to help me get into that community. And so think about all of the cities in your country. Can you come up with that person in all the major cities? And then from there, the connector is the person that will connect you to all these stages. And then a lot of those holes that Mark is talking about, there'll be events and programs, but it's not just about the events and programs, it's also the people. So say I need legal help. You know, is there, obviously you'd go to a lawyer, but is there that lawyer that loves startups and is there to give free legal advice to startups? You know, just advice. Lawyers that are all about startups should give free advice to startups. Now when it comes to the actual work, that's a different story. But just put yourself in that new entrepreneur's shoes, and every question that they have, do you have an answer for that? And if there's not an answer for that or a person you can connect them to, you know, I think that's something to really focus on and see if there's a way to make that happen.
And so I think what I want to reiterate, sorry, had an early morning, is actually what I spoke about this morning. I was over with the North Liverpool Business Forum and then actually went to Liverpool University and spoke to some students there. And I could have talked about startups, the actual entities and growth companies and capital and everything like that. But what's really important and what I think most, especially younger less mature entrepreneurial communities are missing a little bit. And honestly, what a lot of mature communities, especially in the US, are missing is exactly what Mark said. They're starting at the startup phase, which is really just the entity, or there you're talking about the instrumentality of the firm, right? You have an idea, you have people, and you're creating a firm to address a market. That's actually pretty far down the road. And so to use what Brad Feld talks about in terms of entrepreneurial communities is it's entrepreneur-led. And we need to find a way all over the world to engage and open up the eyes of entrepreneurs on an individual basis. I was just at a university class right down the road here, and what they called an entrepreneurship class. I mean, this is university. There were some MBA students in there. Do MBAs and entrepreneurship mix? That's another question. But, I mean, it wasn't that early, right? And I asked all of them if they were entrepreneurs or if they wanted to be entrepreneurs. I asked all of them what their business ideas were. And I got silence back, right? And to me, and I talked to the professor afterwards, that's a cultural thing, they told me. But guess what? Culture doesn't matter in the world of startups anymore. I mean, it does. There's certainly culture within your communities and with your countries, but we need to find a way to empower individuals to overcome kind of social norms, to overcome kind of barriers. And the way that we do that is below the startup phase. The way that we do that is through inspiration, through discovery and team building. It's encouraging people to overcome the risks in places like Lithuania, for instance, where I ran a startup weekend. And I immediately changed my goals for the weekend. It wasn't about launching companies. It was 250 people there who culturally, it was not okay for them to work on something that they wouldn't work on past the weekend, right? Like risk and failure are not okay in their culture. And that sounds a little cliche, and risk and failure are cliche a little bit right now, but immediately we had to work on breaking down the barriers, the social norms between Joey and I. Could we face each other on the street on Monday morning if I failed, or if we worked on something that wasn't part of my job at IBM? And so using mechanisms like Startup Weekend, not just to launch companies, but to go back down and to create these mindsets and these ambitions in individuals. If we can work on that from the bottom up, I think that we're going to build stronger and more active communities. And we need to move away from, not that it's not the end goal, but away from immediately scale companies and focus more on the individuals and the culture, I think.
Does anybody have any questions? Comments? I know we had a little startup communities breakout session yesterday. We had some incredible conversation over there.